I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Elena, I'm so glad we're doing this because it's been a while since we were first talking about doing this and then getting our schedules, and we had some travel and a couple of things here and there. And it's funny to look back on the original questions that we had to what the world is right now. Because when we were first talking, Silicon Valley Bank was still a real bank that didn't have any problems, at least not publicly. Companies hadn't started laying off thousands and thousands of people every single day.
Yeah.
So it's changed very quickly, right? The economy, think about even last year, right? It was, oh, look, here in the US, we got to increase interest rates because there's too much inflation and there's too many jobs. And now it's, oh my gosh, why are we increasing interest rates? Because we need to start cutting. Banks are falling apart. People don't have work. So
Yeah.
things have changed so quickly. How are you navigating such rapid change, such unexpectedly rapid change?
Well, I think the technology landscape and the technology industry is always going through change. It's one of those industries where you have to pivot quickly. It's constantly innovating. Things are always changing. So it's in our DNA to be able to quickly move and do things differently and adjust to the changing circumstances. So we're very used to that. I think as a sort of small to medium sized agency, we can pivot quite quickly. We're quite a nimble, quite a flexible kind of organization. So we don't have some of the constraints that unfortunately some kind of larger companies have, that kind of, sort of ring fences them a little bit. So that's one thing that we're really lucky about. So that really helps us. So we're constantly looking at the news, as you would imagine any good PR agency to do. And when the news comes of something this seismic, we are constantly watching, listening to experts, and then we pivot accordingly. At the moment, things are so new still and so fresh. If you're talking specifically about Silicon Valley and what's happening, and then the results in terms of kind of Credit Suisse Bank and all of that stuff, that actually it's a case at the moment of watching and listening, and making sure that we're doing the due diligence to make sure that our business is safe, we're looking after jobs, and we're keeping people within employment. So that's our kind of number one concern. And obviously we've done a lot around looking at how our clients are funded and making sure that we've got a robust client portfolio to kind of weather the storm. I think one of the things that has come out of the Silicon Valley Credit Suisse situation is actually the importance of making sure you diversify your portfolio. And actually for a technology company, it's really important that you're not too attached to one particular client that you've got, or one particular sector. So you've got a good spread of sectors that you cover and businesses that you look after. And I think that's really important, and one of the lessons that has come out of that.
Liberty's obviously focused on technology. You mentioned diversification. Have you had more recent conversations internally with your leadership team about maybe we need to do something other than technology?
Well, technology is our sweet spot, and there's a lot of room within technology. So I think we're okay within tech. I think it's important that we stick to what we do, and we do that well. But within tech, obviously, there's a lot that you can do. So traditionally, we were a company that was quite focused on the telecoms market when we were first founded. And since then, 25 years ago, we celebrated our 25-year anniversary last week, which was really exciting. Over that 25 years, we've really diversified in terms of the sectors that we now look after. So telecoms is still an important part of what we do, definitely. But it's one of 10 different sectors that we look after, and all of them go in peaks and troughs and at different times. And actually sticking to what you do, I think, and sticking to what you do well, I think is a good motto to have.
We're doing tech here, focused in the US. Typically, you're doing tech on the other side.
Yeah.
What is the difference between a UK and a US PR firm? Let's say, even if they're both focused on tech, I'm sure there are media and cultural and business differences that you've got to navigate.
Oh, it's fascinating. I find this whole cultural thing absolutely interesting. I mean, I love being able to talk about it. So, and we talk quite a lot to our clients about it, actually, not only the differences between the UK and the US, but differences within Europe as well, within markets within Europe, and also, of course, differences between Europe, US, APAC, Africa. Each market is very, very different, and it's so interesting to be able to sort of remember some of those differences and take those into account when you're advising clients and running campaigns. I think looking specifically at the differences between the UK and the US, I think US reporters tend to be generally quite US centric. I mean, it's natural, it's a huge market. Lots of people stay within the US, and US news stories are very, very important to them. So unless really you've got a reporter that you're dealing with who's covering a beat that's beyond the US, you need to have a very sharp US focused angle. And so in terms of what that means for companies, you need to make sure that your products and services are available, obviously, in the US, that you've got US customers, you've got local proof points, and all of those are US based. And obviously you must write in American English when you're writing any content for the US. In contrast, the UK, we still focus a lot on kind of UK centric stories, and within the UK there are different regions, and different stories have different weight in each of those regions. But I think kind of generally, if you look at the national and business press, generally they write a little bit more about international topics and how international trends and issues affect the UK and kind of wider Europe. We're seen naturally and understandably and rightly so as a gateway to Europe, and so it can be a good way of getting your message across to sort of wider Europe from the UK. So I think that's one of the kind of the key differences. I think if you look specifically at PR campaigns, if you have a look at kind of corporate messaging in general, whereas in the US you have to, it's very important that you get your right corporate message correct, and that you're extolling that to the media. But in the UK it's a little bit more nuanced. You don't need to, it's not so much about corporate messaging, it's more around the issues. And so thought leadership is much more important here, and journalists like to talk a lot more about thought leadership led kind of coverage. So things like what's happening in the industry and how that affects particular businesses. I think kind of tied to that is the whole kind of topic on product news. So in the US, I think journalists tend to be a lot more favourable to kind of product news and product kind of updates, whereas the UK media is a lot more cynical about that kind of thing, and sort of less likely to cover it. So you can still get product coverage, but you just need to be a bit more creative about how you do it. Let me think about other differences.
Well, I'll jump in while you're thinking. What's one mistake, the main mistake you tend to notice American firms, they're trying to hire a UK PR firm, or they're trying to get into Europe? Do you find there's a common mistake they make because they don't understand the marketplace?
I think there are lots of similarities actually in terms of the UK and the US. So I think if you get those right, you're in a good position. So storytelling is still really important, and making sure you craft your narrative right. So that comes back to that corporate messaging, but just be aware of the differences between the two markets in terms of what works well, and just take more of an issues-led approach in the UK. So storytelling is really important. Building relationships is important in both markets, through whatever kind of vehicle you're going to have to do that. The rise of social media and influencer engagement is really prevalent across both markets. I think obviously the US is a really large market, a much larger market than the UK, and I think sometimes people mistake different kind of markets as being exactly the same, when actually they're quite different. And the populations are different, and what they want is obviously different. So you've got to be really adept to kind of listening to those audiences and adapting your campaigns appropriately, I think.
I find a lot of European companies, when they try to come to the States, they'll bring their, let's say tech companies, they bring their case studies, they bring their, here's what we've done. And it's all European based, and American reporters not interested in it, right? Just like, hey, have you worked with an American customer? And I find there's this big hurdle for them to get attention. I assume you've seen the same thing. What's your advice for those companies who are trying to break into the US? What are they supposed to do? Like, we don't have case studies in America. That's why we're coming here, right? We're
yeah. Well, okay. So the first thing I would say is, another difference is that coming into the US, budgets for PR campaigns tend to be a lot bigger, and we try to be, a little bit more flexible with regards to, our entry level budgets for our work that we do in any market. So the flexibility and value side is really important to us, and that ties to our client service ethos. So I would just, if you're making an investment in a new market, I would just make sure you've got all the pieces to make it work, because otherwise you're not necessarily going to get the value from it. And so in the case of the US, yes, you need to have at least something that's US centric to go on. So if it's not a US customer, that's fine. We've actually had success with launching companies in the US that haven't had a US customer. In fact, one company that we worked with, which was an AI company, it was a very, very, very small company. It didn't have any presence at all in the US. We launched them, and within about 6 months of working together, they had secured Walmart as a customer of theirs, and we had a lot of coverage in places like Fortune and the Financial Times, and that obviously really helped their visibility. But they weren't doing any other marketing, and so they went from zero to kind of hero in a very short space of time, and that was with no customers. And then, of course, once you have one or two, you can then jump off that, and then your campaign kind of takes steam. But what worked in that particular case, where they didn't have customers, is they had a really great story. So they had a great story about their founders, why they set up the company. Their founders had really interesting backstories, and we played on global names that were kind of easily recognizable with the US press that those founders had kind of worked in. So I think there are always ways of doing things, but yeah, just be kind of aware of those differences. The other thing that you can do is, if you've got new data, new local data specific to the US, you can use that to create a news hook. So if you don't, it doesn't necessarily have to be a customer in the US, but if you've got something that you can use as a hook that's specific to the US, that really helps. And in lots of cases, data works really well. So that's another example of what you could do.
What's a specific example when you say using data? How can you, maybe you don't have to give names, but how did you find success using data? Because I was a data guy myself, so I'm always curious to hear other people's stories working with data to get coverage and secure media placements.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of partnerships with data research houses. So, and we call, it's part of our kind of market intelligence work. So obviously with the US, it's a bigger beast doing a research project, because it's a bigger market. There's more people. You've got much more of the Fortune 500 companies within the US. So the people that you have to survey has to be bigger. And we do the same in the UK. It's just on a slightly smaller scale. But journalists, I think, are universal in their kind of appetite for data. It needs to be new, and it needs to be credible. So it needs to have been done by a trusted third party. So data that's created by a company without any kind of recognizable sort of name behind it doesn't work so well. But if you've got new, fresh data that talks to a particular issue that's either a kind of global issue that has kind of relevance in the US, or a US centric issue, then that's going to be successful for you. So that that can be anything, depending on whatever sector you're in, but that works really well, we find.
You've been at Liberty for 14 years, so a majority of the 25 that it's existed, but you rose your way up, right? You were an employee, You got promoted again, now you're the CEO. What is that transition like? Because friends are now subordinates, right? Colleagues are now you're the boss, right? So how did you manage those changing relationships in a way where, oh, maybe things that secrets that you were told, things that you were gossiping about, well, we wouldn't have told you that if we knew you were going to be the CEO one day.
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, it's been a massive privilege. I mean, I've really enjoyed it, and how amazing to have, to know a company so well, and to feel such a part of it. So that's a real privilege for me, and I'm really, really grateful to our founder Dee for kind of having faith in me for so long. I'm sure lots wouldn't. But yeah, I mean, in terms of what it means for relationships with employees, yeah, it can be difficult at times. You have to make quite tricky calls sometimes, and when you have an agency that has standards, because we do, and and rightly so, we've got a strong focus on client service and our client ethos, and that means that we need to provide services that are kind of top notch. And so sometimes that can be difficult in terms of, sometimes having challenging conversations. But I think as long as you're fair and you develop the right culture, and you've got the right kind of supportive culture that encourages people and motivates people, then people respect it. So I think people know that and they respect that the fact that you've got an environment where you require the best of people. But I think as long as people are trying their best, are motivated, are working together well as a team, then I think it all works well. Maybe you need to ask the rest of my team those questions.
Everybody else.
But it's not too challenging.
When you started there, was your plan to say, I'm going to be the CEO one day, or I want to be the CEO somewhere? Or was that so far from anything you were thinking about, just as hey, I'm just here to help out. I'm just here to do my job?
Oh, no, goodness. No. I think everybody in positions like me suffers from imposter syndrome. Don't you sometimes?
Yes, definitely. So I'll ask you some of the tricky challenges, right? The last couple of years, we saw labor market shortages. Now we're seeing layoffs, right? That whipsawed pretty quickly. You manage COVID, right? Inflation has been an issue. Like, how do you, excuse me, manage people's salaries in a world where our revenue is not necessarily going up, but everyone's expenses are going up? What of those challenges did you find the most difficult? Because that was still ongoing in a lot of ways, right? Everyone went hybrid, everyone went remote. So
yeah,
we're still facing these things 3 years later, but it's very treacherous to be in a position like yours and to manage all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, gosh, we've been through so many. Well, as a globe, we've all been through COVID, so I think everybody felt that. I think when COVID first hit, that was probably one of my worst moments. I was really worried about what would happen, because I just thought, and nobody knew.
There's no training for it, right? You don't learn this anywhere, right?
No, exactly. And everybody was going through it together, and everything seemed to be changing so quickly. And it was just very difficult to navigate at the beginning. And I think we all thought that it was going to last 6 months, and by September everything would be normal again. And it just kept going on and on and on. And at one point it didn't look like we were ever going to kind of leave the COVID sort of bubble. But when we now have, and I think it's taught us a lot of good lessons in a way, things like COVID, and often lots of these challenges do. It really reassessed for lots of people what was important. For us, it's really helped us make sure that we've got a really flexible. We were always quite flexible in terms of our working hours, etc. But making sure that we've got the right work-life balance, that people are able to work remotely, that has been a game changer for people, across the board, working mums, working dads, people who have got certain family commitments, people, we saw loads of our team get dogs, for example. And that that's a responsibility in itself. And so just having the flexibility to be able to manage your workload a bit more loosely has really helped with that, and that's one of the lessons that we've learned, and has been a real positive, I think, in terms of some of the things that COVID's taught us, and we'll continue to always look at it that way. And I think that's the best way to get through any challenges. So with rising interest rates and the recent news about the banks, we'll watch, we'll listen, we'll pivot where we need to. We'll try and stay calm, and we'll try and stay positive, because having a positive outlook is really important for team morale as well, and making sure, because it's often quite easy as somebody at my level, and maybe with a few more grey hairs than some of my my team, to think, it's it'll be fine, we've been through worse, it's going to be fine. But some of those junior people, they do worry. So providing that kind of reassurance and explaining things to them, I think is important too.
What do you think happens now with some of the money drying up in venture capital, private equity, right? All the startups, all these tech companies, like you mentioned, that tiny company, 6 months later, they've got Walmart as a customer, right?
Yeah.
Now that tiny company, maybe, let's say the next future version of something company like that, they don't have the money to pay for PR. They don't have a VC investor. They don't have the runway and cash to try to do an experiment like that, or try to make a splash like that. Are you seeing companies feel like, ooh, like, not sure I'm ready for PR right now, right? I need to hold my cash, or we're not raising that next round of funding, so we have to be more cautious than that? When enough companies make those decisions, that's what we get, recessions, right? That's all of a sudden when that innovation starts to drive. What's your experience right now? What are you personally seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously having discussions with some clients that are thinking that way, and some RFPs that were on the cards, a few weeks ago, a few months ago, have now and are now not on the cards anymore. So we've seen a little bit of that. We've seen a little bit of our network in interviewing for certain roles that are no longer roles, and that's hard on them. In terms of our business, I mean, touch wood, we're kind of okay for now, but we're being cautiously optimistic, right? So we're taking the right steps to safeguard the business, and to make sure that, just like we did with COVID, and just like we've done with other challenging times, that we look after our team, we look after our clients, and we look after the business, and that's really important. I mean, I would argue with lots of these companies, and this was the case during COVID as well, it's still really important to have a marketing presence, and if you vanish, there will be a competitor out there that will be investing in PR. So if you completely vanish and you don't do anything, it's going to be to your detriment. So I would encourage clients to continue to invest, even if it's at a lower level than they were doing before, and
do
to
something, do a little bit, right? Don't do zero. Yeah,
exactly. And we're very open to having discussions with companies, even if it's not at the budget that was originally set at the beginning of the RFP. Just come to us, tell us what your budget is, and,
right.
and we will come to you with something that might work for you, and just facilitate that discussion. That's what we're here for. So that would be what I would encourage companies to do.
I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day, and it was from an entrepreneur. And he said, in my first startup, I spent 90% of my time on the product, 10% on marketing, and I had no sales.
Yeah.
And the next startup I did, 30% of my time was on the product, 70% of my time was on marketing, tons of sales.
Yeah.
And I think it goes to your point, right? It can't just be, okay, we cut up all of our marketing and PR and communication spend so we can focus on the product. Like, well, how is anyone going to know about the product?
Well, exactly. And products are difficult to sell. They don't sell themselves. Right.
And they're all kind of the same, unless you're Chat GPT, right?
Yes.
For the first 3 months of running. But now all of a sudden, look, months like later, everyone's got a copycat pretty soon.
Exactly. You need to invest in spending the time and the resources to get people to know about your products and what makes them different. Otherwise, nobody's going to know. You're never going to be able to sell anything. So yeah, that's something I completely agree with you on.
What do you think about the Elon Musk strategy? A lot of people say, look, Elon Musk, he doesn't have a PR team. He doesn't pay for PR. He fired all the Twitter PR people, right? I do wonder if that's a unique situation that maybe other startups shouldn't be copying.
Well, Elon Musk is a bit of a law unto himself, isn't he? I don't think anyone would rush to copy. Certainly, his kind of approach. Obviously been super successful, but certainly his approach to Twitter hasn't been something I don't think people would want to replicate in a hurry. I'd like to meet him. I think he'd be a very interesting person to meet, but yeah, I think he's a pretty unique character that I don't think we can really judge general kind of characteristics from.
Yeah, I think it's more like talking to people who say this. Okay, if you become the richest person in the world, then you can do whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
But until then, right? There's so much, right? There's just so much that you're having to face in this role because it's on the agency, right? It's so many clients you have to manage, so many employees you have to manage, so many media partners that you have to work with and build relationships. What do you find, and we can end on this, what do you find is your most challenging part of your job, the thing that keeps you up at night the most?
Oh, that's a good question. I think actually it's keeping the team really engaged, because I think when it comes to a client challenge, most of the time we've been there before, we've done it before, we know how to kind of navigate our way out of things. But everybody's different. Everybody's got their own personal struggles, and everybody's got their own things going on, that identifying the right ways to motivate people in the right way, and whether you're doing the right things and whether you're coming across in the right way. And when when I'm doing my role, I'm often rushing between lots of different things, and sending a message that maybe comes across too short, and have I offended someone, or and also just being really mindful of the fact that you've got people who, as I said before, just don't have the same levels of experience, so they don't understand things in the same kind of way. And so just being mindful of what they're feeling, and trying to remember certain things about their particular kind of situation is important. And I really don't get that right a lot of the time.
You get it right most of the time? More than 50%?
Right most of the time, but there are times when I'll send an email and it's a bit short, and you just think, oh, and then I have to go back and say, oh, look, I didn't mean it to come across like that, but I'm just rushing between
the short emails. I have the same problem. I'm doing it on my phone. You're in between something, you send it and it's 3 words long, but maybe it should have been 3 sentences long just to make it seem nicer. So I get that issue.
Yeah, exactly. I just think also just being nice to people buy from people. So, I think if we can all be just sort of nice people to each other, I think that really helps. And just making sure that we're coming across in the right way. My mum always said to me, treat people as you'd like to be treated yourself. And I think that's a motto that I'd like to take through to all the different elements of my life, not just my personal life, but my professional life too. And sometimes I don't necessarily get that right. I think so. That sometimes plays on my mind a bit at night.
But it's funny just to hear that answer when I ask, okay, what's the most challenging thing you have? And it comes back to things that we learn in grade school, right? That we learn as a little kid. It's not about the clients. It's not about inflation. It's not about, it's can we just all be nice to each other because everybody's got something going on. It's amazing to see how those really basic skills are the ones that we still struggle to get right decades and decades later.
Yeah. I mean, look at Elon Musk. If he was just a little bit nicer to people, I think his PR would be a lot better. And
I agree.
So yeah, it's something that's pretty universal, I think.
Elena, this has been fantastic. Thank you for ending your week with me. I know it's late Friday afternoon in the UK right now, so I hope
I'm going to start on the cocktail scene.
Exactly. I still have a whole day here for me, so no cocktails yet. Just sticking with the water. Elena, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time today.
No worries. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.